Should I make a vlog? Should I not? Should I make a vlog? I was just thinking about this. I actually wanted to write it down, try and make it more structured, or write a script. Basically, it's about trying to take my experiences, my life experience, you know, which is like a blob. Let's say my life experience is like this one big blob. And let's say, I'm going to say, this is my life, or my life is the word, and the word is going to refer to this blob, and the blob is my life experience so far. And what I wanted to do was take that life experience and sort of dissect it and, you know, cut it into pieces and use more and more categories to identify different aspects of my life. So it's basically about trying to create something like an identity. So, you know, like I was born with a male body, and whatever, you know, all of that stuff, different categories that we use to sort of describe aspects of our life. The reason I wanted to sit down and write it is because I just wanted to, I don't know, think about it, but I'm a bit lazy. I'm a lazy person, I'm very lazy. So I thought I'll just make a rant about it. So I think before I even go into it, I think the idea that's sort of the overall impetus for this project of trying to take my life experience and put it into all these different categories is because my overall impression is that I am sort of like my identity, at the risk of sounding, oh God, at the risk of sounding presumptuous or whatever, I think my identity is kind of in the minority of minorities. So what do I mean by that? Well, one of the things that comes to mind is, first of all, let's take I mean, I'm not going to go into, I'm not going to try and do this in a very logical or structured way. I'm just going to just say different words and see what words I can use to describe myself. So first of all, so I'm like this transgender person, to be more specific, transgender woman or trans woman. I'm still trying to get used to that. It's my conditioning. Anyway, so that is kind of in a minority there, you know. So you're a minority there, and also I'm also a trans woman of color, which is also another kind of added minority kind of thing. And I have to say that I was born in a third world country, so you know it's kind of like a disadvantage, you could say. You know, I was born in Sri Lanka, and when I was born, I think when I was 5 years old, that's when there was the civil war started, and I think that's why we left it, because of the civil war. So I come from a country, basically, a lot of people fled the country because of the war. So we're like this diaspora, the Sri Lankan people who are like this diaspora. So I've got that kind of a identity background, like I'm part of this minority group of people who are, you know, because my ethnicity is Tamil. So, you know, so it's like, okay, so I've got that kind of ethnic kind of history, and I'm from this third world country or whatever. So that put me in something like and because I'm living in, you know, first world Western country, in here you could say I am like a minority in this country or whatever. So that's another layer to my identity. Um, uh, so yeah. So anyway, so what else can I say? So I could say that. I mean, when I was growing up as a kid, my dad had a good stable job, so we weren't really poor, but we were sort of like, we didn't have a lot of money, but we didn't starve or anything. So I would say it's like a working class, perhaps. But yeah, so I guess from a class perspective, you could say I am coming from this lower kind of socio-economic background. So that is another layer to my identity. Um, so okay, so I've had the experience of I've had the experience of being conditioned as a male, a man or boy, and given it's taken me such a long time to like understand what's happened to me or whatever. So from my current perspective, I could. The word transmisogyny comes to mind. It's like there's this misogyny towards trans women, which is kind of it's a different from misogyny. Misogyny is the hatred of women, right? But transmisogyny is a hatred of trans women, and that creates additional kind of layers of complexity, perhaps, because people are going to hate me because I am identifying as a woman, so there's that kind of oppression towards women, but they're also going to hate me because I'm a trans person as well. So there are like those two kinds of there's an intersection between my trans status and now, as well as the fact that I am identifying as a female. The trans man, on the other hand, you could say the male position is more privileged than the female position in this ostensibly patriarchal society. Men have traditionally had more privilege and status, so a trans man does not have the same problems as a trans woman, because that's kind of. And I've heard people talk about it where usually trans men are taken more seriously than trans women or something. And if you think about it, a lot more trans women are the ones who actually get a lot of violence committed against them. I don't know why. Anyway, so maybe because a lot of them work in the sex work or whatever or something. I don't know. But anyway, so all of these layers are part of my identity. So yeah, my ethnicity is Tamil, my race is kind of like a colored person or whatever, and so I live in the context of living in this first world, predominantly white. Australia is mostly white. It's much more white than America. Australia is much more homogenous. I don't think there's a lot of racism here. I think the racism in America is much more. There's much more. My impression is that there's much more the relations between the races in America. It seems to be much more complicated and much more. There might be more the problems there, whereas in here it's mostly like Aboriginal people are the ones who have historically been discriminated against. There was this white Australia policy as well. I think Australians have this history of xenophobia, but it's not necessarily. But the people here tend to assimilate better. Everyone tends to become this. There's a much more homogenous Australian identity than there's in the States. Whereas States, I think, is much more fragmented. Whereas here, the identity is much more like everyone's this Aussie or whatever. Everyone gets incorporated into this Aussie identity. I don't know. There's much more homogeneity here. Sometimes they do racial problems crop up, but I just don't find it that as problematic as I would think it's in the States. I think it's there. People are more sensitive to the race issue than they are here. Here, people are not that sensitive. Anyway, so all of these terms I've identified, race, ethnicity, class, um, being a migrant. I'm like a first generation migrant. Like, I came here in 1995. So I also came here when I was 16 years old. So I was in a very vulnerable phase, and I had to deal with this transition to this whole different culture or whatever. So yeah, coming from being born in a third world country and being this part of the diaspora due to the civil war. The civil war only recently ended or whatever. What else? Trans status, trans women status, trans misogyny, and perhaps even misogyny. If I pass as a woman, I'll be dealing with misogyny. But if I don't pass, and if I'm seen as a trans woman, I'll be dealing with trans misogyny. So there are two types of misogyny. If people don't, if I pass, meaning if I can, people don't clock me as a trans person, then I might have to deal with misogyny. But if I'm clocked as a trans person, then trans misogyny. Yeah. And so class and whatever, all of these things. I also I have a very poor work history, so I'm like a long-term unemployed person. So I do have my privileges are that I do have a pretty, I have an education, so I have that as my privilege. And another privilege I would say is because I was raised as a boy. Usually boys, because they're conditioned to be more assertive, or they're expected to do things. And because I've had that history of people expecting me to do things, I can take that experience, and even if I'm a trans woman now, because I've had those experiences where I was just in these leadership positions or whatever, that is going to help me to be more forward, and whereas if you're a girl, particularly growing up in this kind of traditional Sri Lankan culture where there is rigid gender norms, I think my sister kind of suffered from this, where they tended to, if you're a woman, if you're a girl, you're not expected to do certain things. You're not expected to, perhaps. I mean, I guess in our culture they do expect girls to get education and work, but there's still kind of, it's very patriarchal. You know what I mean? So where was I going with that? Yeah, so I've actually seen this in another trans woman. She talked about it because she was like, she was like in America. She was like a football athlete. She was growing up, and she said that because as a boy I was conditioned to be to be more out there. I used that that helped me to be much more assertive when I became a woman. Whereas I guess if you were conditioned not to be that assertive, it might be harder to if you know what I mean. That I would consider that to be a positive thing, because one positive thing about growing up in a patriarchal culture, this is like a very fucked up way to look at it, because it is not a good positive thing, because it's coming at the expense of the female. The woman is, it's kind of my conditioning as a male to be more like a leader came at the expense of the negative conditioning of the females in that culture. So it's not something I'm proud of, but I have to say that the fact that I was conditioned to be this boy or whatever, and I didn't really like it. I hated it. I don't like being the leader. It's not something I like. I'm a much better follower, to be honest. I just can't do the leadership. I mean, there were times when I was doing it, but I am a much better follower. That's my psychology is like that. I just hated the fact that they made me do these things that I really wasn't comfortable with. So that was some kind of a negative impact as well. So it wasn't completely positive. That conditioning, that male conditioning, had its negative effects as well, because my psychology was just not suited to it. I wanted to basically sit down and I didn't want to do all of these guy things or whatever, you know. But I did have fun. Anyway, I'm just ranting the heck out of here. So I guess you guys understand what I'm trying to say. So there were all these layers to my identity: race, ethnicity, class, gender, coming from a third world country, first generation migrant, or trans and transmisogyny or trans woman or whatever. So I feel like I'm like in a very minority of position, and I feel I don't feel in a way I feel like, whoa, that's so cool. Like you're really like. It makes me feel kind of proud, like, oh look, I am really like, it makes me feel more of an individual than if I didn't have all these subtexts to my identity. I would feel like I was more part of a group. But I feel like because I've got all these layers, I feel like I'm much more of an individual. But then another thing I want to say is this life, I didn't plan my life to turn out the way it has turned out. I never thought I would be a transitioning to female or whatever when I was growing up, because I didn't, when I was growing up, I was basically living with my family. I was basically living in this kind of sheltered family environment, so I didn't have a lot of exposure to all of these issues about gender and all that. That only started happening when I was 16, when I came here, and that's when my real problems started happening. But as a kid, I was just me being me, and nobody, I might have been very feminine or whatever. No, people want, I didn't have any opportunity to be bullied on that ground. The only times I got bullied was people would make fun of my ethnicity or whatever. I really hated that shit. That's the only type of bullying I kind of experienced, because of where I grew up. I grew so yeah. So yeah, I grew up in the United Arab Emirates. For 10 years I lived there before I came here. So there, yeah, I lived as an expatriate. So I didn't have the experience of living in a place you can call your home. I was like a foreigner, in a foreign land. From the age of 5 years old, I was living as this wandering person. So I've never had this sense of any nationality or identity to a land or to a home, or it just didn't sound. But then again, when they used to play cricket, I'd be like, oh look, it's Sri Lanka's playing. So anyway. So, yeah, anyway, so, but, all of these experiences, I feel like at the moment I'm in a pretty good place, having gone through all of this disillusionment and confusion, and I feel like I'm sort of getting my life together as best as I can. And, yeah, at the moment I feel like things are sort of coming together. And the gender issue, I just cannot believe what a strong thing it was for me, like how important it was I needed a word to identify what I was going through. Like I've always, even before I even knew anything about transgender or whatever, I always had this inner perception of being a girl, a female person. It was very subconscious. It was very natural. It was just the way I saw myself. I didn't think there was anything wrong with that. I didn't tell people about it, because I thought this is just something I just didn't think it was something. First of all, I didn't think I could do anything about it. So if I couldn't do anything about it, what's the point of talking about it? And when I grew up as a kid, there was no internet. I didn't have, like nowadays kids have access to the internet, the information, if I didn't have access to the internet, I probably wouldn't have known anything about all of these issues. So, access to information is that is another thing, when I was growing up, I didn't have this kind of information. So if I had it, I probably would have done something about it earlier. I probably would have transitioned earlier, you know what I mean? Anyway. So, oh, that's a big ass one. Yeah, I'm just being this skinny top thing I like. This is another kind of dress I kind of like. It's sort of sort of nice. It's sort of it's kind of casual. You can just wear it. Anyway, just yeah, my foundation is crap today, so it's gonna be like so yeah, just put a colorful thing there and put a I used you know, this freaking pencil liner, so it's not really that it's sort of blended in a little bit. Anyway, yeah, I also do pencil on I didn't paint this, I used a pencil on it. I use a lip pencil and this kind of thing. Oh, thank God. Anyway, just sort of talking about this whole identity issues and the layers and all of that to my identity. God damn it. Identity is so complex sometimes. A sense of self. There was I was suffering from feeling invisible. You know, you're not having a sense of self. Now I feel like I'm having a little bit more appreciation or a little bit of an understanding. You know, to migrating from one country, you know, to another, and you know, that can have a huge impact on your identity. You can have, you know, that can be a type of traumatic experience in itself. I didn't appreciate what a traumatic experience it was going to be for me, given I was 16 years old when it happened. I was basically a kid. And that kind of, you know, I was very happy to come here, you know, because we were living in a pretty precarious situation, you know. So I was really looking forward to coming here because I thought, yeah, look at all the freedoms that we have and I could do all these things. And yeah, but I didn't appreciate what the migration can create trauma. And yeah, I don't think I should underestimate that. But, you know, people seem to cope and grow and whatnot. All of that stuff. Anyway, alright, later.